Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I am Scott. Going to be going over all the books that I read in September. I read 18 books. We're going to count them down from worst, and it's definitely worse, to first. Let's go. Coming in at number 18 is The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. Yeah, I just filmed my vlog for this week, which also covered this book. I will let you know if you haven't watched the vlog. This got a 0 star. My first 0 star of the year. I didn't ever really think that I would give anything a 0 star, but this is it. It's a very poorly plotted, characterized. The characters don't make any sense. Thriller in which you pretty much know what's going to happen. The characters act for no reason whatsoever, or they act just because the plot needs them to act that way. I will also say that some reviewers have said that this book is very close to the book The Last Mrs. Parrish. I have not read that book. I cannot say. I will just say that this book is truly awful. This is my opinion. If you go to Goodreads, you're going to see that it has very good ratings. It's believed last time I checked it was a 4.34 with nearly 300,000 5-star reviews. So, one guy's opinion, truly awful book, utter garbage. Did not think that there would be a book this year that would be worse than the subtle art of not giving a fuck. But I have found it. Coming in at number 17. Coming in at number 17 is Unfinished Portrait by Agatha Christie, writing as Mary Westmacott. I have read 3 Mary Westmacott books in the past 6 weeks or so. You will see another one coming up soon. This one ranks so low because it follows the same pattern as the first Westmacott book I read, Giant Bread, which basically goes over this person's childhood and their young adulthood. And there was no reason to. There was nothing in that, like, 100 plus pages that was relevant to what we got later. And characters that Christie writes, overall, a lot of them bear the same qualities. They're not particularly interesting on their own. They are interesting in mysteries, especially because, they could be the murderer, they're a suspect, or they're a red herring. But when there's no murder and you just have to read about these boring ass people and their boring ass relationships with people that are boring, it's just not interesting at all. Number 16 is one of 2 books, I believe, that I have read previously. This one is Enchanters Endgame by David Eddings, also written by his wife Lee Eddings, apparently. Later on, they would share co-writing credit, but they do not here. This is a book that I read the entire series, the Belgary ad, when I was a teenager. I believe was the first time I read it. I have read it since then, but I have not read it at the very least in 20 years or so. I read this as part of my Tolkien readathon that I was doing. I had to pick the last book of a series, and I decided to pick one that I had read before and one that I wanted to see if I felt about it the way I did when I was a teenager. I do not. It is poorly written. It is about a chosen one character who doesn't really do anything. He's just a tool. he's not a tool like a jackass. All the other characters around him pretty much are that, but he's just a tool. He doesn't really act on his own. He's controlled basically. Some of the least likable characters I found in fiction, particularly Aunt Pulgera. Some of the worst writing that I read in fiction. The Eddings have a real bad problem with dialogue attribution. It just becomes overwhelming, and it's essentially all that I can see, and it's annoying. So, childhood ruined. Number 15 is Undertaking Irene by Phoebe Mcloyd, I believe. It's a Kindle book, so I don't have a physical book to hold right here. This one, at least, is somewhat entertaining, but it's another one that's not written well. It's about a person investigating a murder who's not a detective, who does not have the skills to be a detective. She's a woman, so obviously she has to be attracted to a man in the case. Oh, and it's a man that could possibly maybe be the murderer, but maybe not. And yeah, it's at least there's some fun to be had in it, but generally, well, there are multiple books in the series, and I'm not going to read the next one. So. Number 14 is The Dog Stars by Peter Heller. It's a post apocalyptic book written by a guy who was in the Iowa Writers Workshop and his shows. I will say, to be fair, that the writing becomes a lot better in the second part. The first part was just aggravating, and why are you writing like this? Is there a reason you're writing like this? No, just want to do it. So but it improves, although no indentation, no quote marks, uh, uh, emotional manipulation, as I will repeat every time. I don't mind being emotionally manipulated. Do not let me feel you doing it so clumsily. Uh, Apparently, the guy who wrote this is older than me, but he writes about women like he's a 15-year-old boy. This is another book that has very good ratings on Goodreads and Storygraph, but just could not get into it. And I will say, there's three parts to the novel. The second part, from the beginning of the second part until he gets shot at, somewhat spoilers, but not really. That is a great section. The rest of it just does not work for me. Number 13 is the other Agatha Christie book, Absent in the Spring. The reason this one is at 13 is because it does not flash back to her childhood, but it does contain flashbacks. It does contain family members who are the same type of boring family members that are in other Agatha Christie books, except we don't get a fun murder to counterbalance that. It. I will say that this book would probably rank higher for me if I did not have so much experience with Agatha Christie. Characters that are in here I have seen dozens of times in Agatha Christie books. If you are reading this as this is your first Agatha Christie book, it could be something you really like. But again, these are characters that I am used to, characters that I'm a bit tired of, and an ending that I'm just like, sure, it makes sense, but I don't care. Number 12 is Mimi Lee Gets a Clue by Jennifer J. Chow. The book I read on Kindle. Uh, it's not a good book, but I enjoyed it, if only because of the fact it had a talking cat that helped a pet groomer solve a crime. Okay. Um, Again, another person who's not a detective, has no detective skills, and falls for somebody really the case and acts like a teenager about it. But again, it has a cat and it talks. And it can talk to dogs, even, or it can understand dogs. No, it can talk to dogs. It can talk to other animals, even though how I don't know, but it has a talking cat. Number 11 is Silver Bullet by Stephen King. Silver Bullet contains both the novella Cycle of the Werewolf and the screenplay for the movie Silver Bullet, which he wrote, which is, of course, based on Cycle of the Werewolf. This is a book that was published in 1985. It went out of print, but I did a ranking of 91 Stephen King books, so I wanted to have one that I know that I have seen before at least. I do not remember if I actually read it before, but I have seen this before. So I found it decently priced. So I have every book that I am ranking in those 91 books. It's fine. I'm not a particular fan of Cycle of the Werewolf. I think it should have been expanded to novel length. That I should find a reason to care about these characters more. I think this is one of the cases where the movie is better than the book because Silver Bullet is kind of just campy fun. It's a drive-in theater movie, and it doesn't try to be anything more than that. So it's decent. Number 10 is Treasure Island by Robert Louis Stevenson. The book I know about, but I have never read before. It was fine. I like the character Jim. I like the character of Long John Silver. The adventure was fairly interesting, but I felt it was a little short. I felt it ended abruptly, but I think that if I had read this when I was a kid, that I would have enjoyed it much more. And if I read it now, I would probably have that nostalgic feel for it. But reading it as a much older person now, it just doesn't stand up as well as it could have. I have cats fighting. I have cats coming in here. Well, you're not fighting anymore. Number 8 is The Girl on the Train by Paula Hawkins. It's a mystery suspense written with 3 different perspectives. I will say that some of the problem I have with this is that it's pretty obvious where it ends up. I do enjoy Rachel, the main character, her perspective. It's written for 3 perspectives. As I said, we spend most of the time with Rachel. She sees something on a train and she ends up going to the police about it, and things just kind of go downhill from there. Number 8 is The Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court by Mark Twain. I said uh, in a vlog before that I mixed this one up with The Prince and the Pauper. I had not read either of them before, but I was expecting a kid in this one, and I got confused at first. I will say that it's a much darker novel than I was expecting. I know that Twain can be serious while also being humorous, but I think this one was just way darker than I was expecting with the more tragic ending. And it touches quite a bit on slavery with a 19th century man looking at, you know, basically class systems in 5th century England. Enjoyable. I don't think I appreciated the ending that much. I think it was fine. I just think the ending felt rushed. Number 7 is Hearts in Suspension by Stephen King and others. Hearts in Suspension is published by the University of Maine. It contains the novella Hearts in Atlantis, which is also available in the book Hearts in Atlantis, as well as a long essay about 50 pages or so by Stephen King about his time going to college in the 60s during the Vietnam War, participating in Vietnam protests. Also contains articles from the college newspaper that he wrote for his column King's Garbage Truck. I think 4 or 5 articles from that, which are interesting as far as, you know, a King fan seeing how he used to write. But on their own, they're just fine. Also contains several essays from classmates and professors who were at college at the time with him. Some of them talking about King himself as he was as a student and about the Vietnam War, the Vietnam protests. Uh, the writing ability varies a bit in there, but it's all interesting. I will say that the only thing that really goes against this is that it doesn't have a lot of rereadability factor. Really, once you read it, you're fine. You got the novella, but I also have that novella already in another book. Emma by Jane Austen is number 6. Emma is one of, I believe, 3 Jane Austen books that I have now read. Uh, I know it primarily as being the basis of the movie Clueless. I I tend to do a little bit of light Google searching before I read a book, just kind of see how other people feel about books and stuff. Because I don't particularly care about spoilers. If I'm spoiled about something, it doesn't ruin anything for me. And I did see that lots of people don't like Emma, and lots of people love Mr. Knightley. And I was kind of reversed on that. I liked Emma, well, also recognizing her flaws, and I really didn't like Mr. Knightley at all. Uh, I enjoyed it overall, but as is going to be the case with most books like this that aren't necessarily romances, but have romance as a heavy component of it, older books like this aren't going to hold as much interest for me in regards to the relationships. In that regard, I appreciate it more just as a character study of a young woman, Emma, who realizes her own flaws and tries to improve. Number 5 is another book that I have read previously. It is Carry On Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse. It is a collection of 10 short stories about Jeeves and Wooster. Uh, Bertie Wooster is one of my favorite Wodehouse characters, as with at least particularly the Jeeves and Wooster books and a lot of other books. It's quite funny. The only thing that ever brings down the Jeeves and Wooster books for me is the fact that so many of Wooster's friends are assholes. Which I know that's what gets the story going, but I just feel bad for Bertie. So, but still a great book, as is pretty much every other Jeeves and Wooster book. Yeah, I can't think of any right now. There is a book called Ring for Jeeves, which isn't that great, but it does have Bertie Wooster in it. So every Jeeves and Wooster book, I think, is pretty great. Number 4 is Eleanor Oliphant is Perfectly Fine by Gail Honeyman. I will note that it says on the front that it's incredibly funny. It's not incredibly funny. It is It does have humor in it. It's more of a devastating book. If you're going into this book looking for a good, fun, light, humorous read, this isn't the book for you. If you're looking to get your heart pulled out and stomped on the floor, hey, this might be the book for you. So, is young woman Eleanor Oliphant has she comes across as a little bit different. I thought at first that she was on a spectrum, but she's not, according to the author. And she has a burn on her face, which we find out about what happened in the novel. And there's just basically her getting out in the world, meeting people, acting normally with them, forming a friendship. There is a male female platonic friendship in here, which is interesting to see because usually when you see this type of relationship that there is in here, it usually ends up being a romance, but it is not. Not to say that it doesn't possibly become that like sometime after the book ends, but at least in the book, it is not. It's a very good read. Number 3 is Thank You for Listening by Julia Whelan. Julia Whelan is an actress and an audiobook narrator. This is a book about two audiobook narrators who develop a relationship. It is a romance novel, but I think as far as romance novels go, it is particularly well written. The characters are interesting. They're flawed. They don't have the same uninteresting like qualities that you see in a lot of romance novels. Interesting for me at least is it goes into a little bit of how audiobooks are done and the whole process, and I find that interesting. And also it she uses her own history well. It talks about acting and actors, and the Swanee, the main character, used to be an actress. She had an accident that uh, made her lose an eye, and but she wants to still be an actor, and she's doing the audiobook narration because she can no longer be an actor. So we got all that too. We have uh, familial problems. I will say there is one family character in here that I just really dislike, really dislike, and I don't really see any reason to have that character in here. But that's just me. Maybe I'm projecting. Who knows? Great read. Number 2 is Holly by Stephen King. Third Stephen King book I read this month after not reading any Stephen King this year. This just came out this month. It is about the character Holly Gibney, who has been in the Bill Hodges Mr. Mercedes trilogy, as well in the book The Outsider, in the novella If It Bleeds. This is her basically taking front and center in a novel for the first time. She is trying to track down a missing woman, and her antagonists are two octogenarian professors, uh, kind of following King's trend of having weak villains, but in this case at least, even though they're obviously physically weak, they're still very interesting characters. I don't, except for some technology issues, which is pretty common through a lot of books I read. I don't have any problems with this. I know that some people have problems with the mention of COVID and politics, but it is written and set in 2021, so it makes sense that that's going to be part of the book. Overall, it's a very fun read. I have it very high rated up in my Stephen King list. Will time make it go down lower? I don't know, but I still think it's a very good book. And at number 1, we have The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. Nickel Boys is set at the Nickel Academy, which is basically a reform school where kids may go just because, and basically they do not lead a good life there, and sometimes not a long life. And it's worse for the black kids than it is the white kids, although it wasn't good for the white kids either, usually. It's just a devastating book. It is following the trend of five-star books that I'm unlikely to read again, which also includes Night by Ellie Vessel and somewhat Animal Farm. I probably read Animal Farm again, though, but I will not read these two again. But it's just a devastating book, and both a great way to end the list and a horrible way to end the list. It, if you're looking for happy endings, they're not here, but I think it's an important book to read and just devastating. So those are the 18 books that I read this month. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment, and I will talk to you next time with more books.